Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight. My name is Trey Kennedy, and I'm with an AmeriCorps member. I'm an AmeriCorps member serving with Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground program. Conservation Nebraska's mission is to protect our natural state's legacy and educate the public. We do this by supporting communities and increasing civic engagement, which we accomplish through locally led education efforts and community engagement projects to address local conservation issues. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, just a couple things. Zoom audience, your cameras are turned off and you will be muted throughout the presentation. If you do have any questions, feel free to tap them in the chat or the Q&A section. And then we will have a quick Q&A at the end of the period. Or Dr. Hahn, if you feel free, like you want to answer questions throughout the presentation, we can do that as well. For both in-person and online attendees, we will have a brief survey following the presentation. This shouldn't take too long, maybe about 1 to 2 minutes. And this survey just kind of helps us gauge where people are feeling and how they feel about the speakers that we bring on. And it just helps us gauge us for the future. But so on and so forth. I'm going to be introducing Dr. Hahn. So Dr. Hahn is a respected professor at University of Nebraska Omaha. He's dedicated nearly a decade of studying bats and advocating for their protection. Through his research and educational outreach, he has been a leader in bat conservation, raising awareness for their vital roles in our ecosystem. His recent work explores the challenges and the successions of conserving bats in urban environments. So please welcome Dr. Hahn. And then just real quick, everybody, with the snow currently rampaging through Nebraska, if there are any issues, we will be recording this and then putting it out online. If we do get a crash or certain issues, we will try to address them promptly. So Dr. Hahn, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Well, thank you for joining me tonight. Hopefully you stay warm and indoor. Hopefully the snow is not too much of trouble for you, and it's my pleasure to share my knowledge as well as my research on bats. I titled this presentation as Bats in Your Backyard and Beyond, mostly because I was in the news last fall because my lab is collaborating with a local nonprofit organization to study bats in Omaha area. So the particular this project is emphasizing backyard, and we will circle back to this particular project. But before that, I just want to give you a quick overview of what I'm planning to talk about. I don't know how much everybody knows about bats, given I assume this is a general audience. So I will start today's presentation with a quick, simple bat biology 101, which will take about 20-25 minutes. And then from there, I will focus on bat conservation, particularly in eastern Nebraska, where most of my current ongoing research happens. So that's the plan. And by the end, we will have some time to answer questions. So let's start with this bat biology 101. Bats are mammals just like us. They are the second most diverse order of mammals. The most diverse one are rats and mice, of course. And the second one in this chart, you can see there are over 1,400 species of bats worldwide. And you can see totally there are about 5,500 mammal species, including us. And quite a lot of them are bats. Here you can see the bat's size really varies a lot. We have some giant ones, the fruit bats, fruit-eating bats. They can go, if they open up their wings, they can go 6 feet. That's taller than me, honestly. On the other hand, this super tiny one, the littlest bat, it's smaller than a thumb. It's less than a dime by weight, and it's only 4 inches if you open up. Regardless the size, those are the only mammals that can truly fly. We have those flying squirrels. I'm sure you have heard there's flying squirrels in Nebraska. They are called flying squirrels, but they actually cannot fly. They glide. They go from one tree to another by gliding. On the other hand, bats can truly fly. So that's one thing awesome about them. And if you look at the wing of bats, it's comparable to our hand. If you look at the bones, like here, this is the wing on top of my screen and it opens up of a bat wing. And if you compare the bones here, like those are just like our fingers. So just imagine your hand get both of your hands get so huge and with membrane, thin membranes in between, we potentially can fly as well, but um, this comparison just demonstrates they're not much different from us. And just like us, they gave birth to little bats, which we call pups. Um, there are pictures to show them. There's one on the left. There's the pup on this side. The pup will get milk from the mother, just like human. We breastfeed our babies. It's the same thing. That's just like us. That's why they're part of the mammals. And usually, um, each round, a bat can give birth to 1 to 2 pups, very comparable to human. And a lot of those bats are nocturnal, meaning they're active at night. Not all of them are. Some of them, like the fruit bat I showed earlier, those are diurnal. They're active during the day. They look for fruits to eat. But the majority of the bats are nocturnal, active at night. And they have mammalian eyes, just like us. Their eyes are comparable to ours in terms of structure or in terms of the anatomy. So they can see things the same way like us, or in another way to say, they cannot see things when it's dark, just like us. So to adapt to this darkness, they went many, many million years ago, a long time ago, they went with this acoustic way to navigate in the dark because they cannot see. They produce this so-called ultrasound to help them navigate in the darkness. And if you want to do a quick comparison, like what is happening now is I'm making audible sound that is between 20 to 20K. That's the audible range. And some animals, particularly large animals, large mammals like the elephant, they would make infrasound, lower frequency than what we hear. On the other hand, bats, those make higher, much higher frequency sound that we don't hear. And they use this sound to detect objects in the darkness. And this is just a quick basic physics of sound. Sound is waves, like I'm showing here. Basically, energy traveling through different type of media in the form of waves. That's why we call them sound waves. And nowadays, the most comparable thing, I'm sure everybody have heard about sonar, the sound navigation and ranging that used on boats, uh, sometimes airplanes or other places. They use the sound propagation to navigate, measure distance, communicate, or even detect objects. And this whole modern day sonar actually came from the biosonar or so-called echolocation that is found in a lot of animals, including bats. So how bats use the sound to navigate to detective objects is like the graph I'm showing here. A bat is a sender, send out the sound wave like the red lines drawing, and it's going this direction. When the sound reaches an object in the space, it will bounce back the sound wave will be bounced back and coming to the same sender. That is, in this case, the sender becomes the receiver. And by hearing the sound it generated just very short amount of time ago, by hearing back the echo, they can tell, oh, there's something in the space. They can tell how far it is. So that's the basic of echolocation. And because of the echolocation, bats can fly in the darkness, can find food in the darkness, can avoid collisions in the darkness, like I'm showing here. Some bats eat insects, which we'll talk a little bit more later, what they eat. But here, basically, I'm showing the sound is emitting, the bat is emitting sound, and the bounced back bat insect. And because it's sound, just like what is happening now, we can record it. If you talk about the engineering side, there's really no difference between recording a bat and recording a song or recording our conversation that is happening right now. Uh, Here we have some devices, just recorders that we call bat detectors, that we can use to record the sound, so-called echolocation, and we can display it. Once we record the sound, we can display it on the computer screen. And as a bat biologist, I'm able to use the sound, the echolocation generated by bats to tell what they do, what species they are, and get a lot of information. And even though the sound itself is high frequency beyond our hearing range, the sound engineers could slow it down and turn it into audible, which I have a quick play. Hopefully it work. I don't know if this works on with my microphone, so we'll give it a try. I played it twice. I don't know if on your end you heard the sound or not. Hopefully it did. Basically, that how what happened is the sound engineers or the recorders recorded back echolocations and then played it much slower than the original speed to slow it down to make it audible to us. And of course, when we display it, you can see there are quite a lot of different shapes and frequency ranges. They represent different species of bats. And by looking at this screen I have here, which we call at spectrogram, we can tell what species, what the bat were doing. So a lot of other things that we can gather from the recordings. And that's actually how I or my lab conducts research on bats. And of course, they're active at night in the darkness, but they have to have a home just like us. Where do they choose a home? Well, the bat home is called a roost, and there are all kinds of roosts possible. As a matter of fact, the roosting preference is one general way that we use to classify and study bats. Some of those, like I have on the screen right now in the picture, though some bats roost in caves, and of course, those can use structures that are similar to caves. A lot of man-made structures are comparable. For example, the attic of your house, a highway overpass, um, a parking garage. A lot of those structures, in a way, they mimic natural caves and structures like this. So bats that are generally roost in caves can also use those man-made, human-made structures. On the other hand, there are other bats roost in trees. Some of them will try to go into the hole if they're like a hollow space on the tree trunk. They can use that just like some birds. And some of them just hang there, use their claw, use their foot claw to the tree. And of course, there's some bats, as I mentioned before, can use um, human-made structures. Like this is I believe, an attic of a house, and the bats just found it and used it. And there are also bats like making leaves into a little tent and then roost in them. The most famous one, I think, in terms of bat roost is probably the Congress Bridge in Austin, Texas. This is like downtown Austin, and there's a bridge across the river. And I happen to have a video I collected a few years ago under the bridge. I'm gonna turn off the sound; it's kind of noisy. Um, but you can see millions of bats roost under this bridge. And my screen, I'm turning the screen away. They roost under this bridge and they fly out every night. And the estimate of number of bats is at least over 1 million individuals. And this is one of the most famous, probably the most touristy spot. Well, I have to take it back. Austin, Texas has a lot of attractions, and this is definitely one of them, the touristy spot. The one interesting fact is that they estimate people traveling to Texas, Austin, Texas, to watch bats near this bridge. Um, those people bring at least $10 million per year to the city just because of the bat watching activity. And this estimate is like long time ago, so I'm sure um, those bats living under that bridge brings a lot to the local economy. Um, and besides where they stay, they need to have food just like us. And so here, let's really quickly go over something bats potentially can eat. Like I have on the screen, it's literally everything possible as food for bats, going from fruits to insects to some vertebrate species like frogs and fish, or in the extreme case, bats. There are bats that feed on other bats. Um, so all of those are possible food items for bats, depends on the species. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there are over 1,400 species around the world. It is not surprising that the food choice of bats is also very diverse. And here I have some pictures to demonstrate what they eat. Like I have here on the upper side of the screen, this is the common species. Actually, I showed earlier those roost under the bridge in Austin, Texas, called Mexican free-tailed bats, or some places, some people call it Brazilian free-tailed bats. They eat insects. A lot of the insects happen to be agricultural pets. The lower corner, I have a bat eating a scorpion. You can see, so there are scorpion eating bats. But generally, we consider them as insectivores, eating insects. And of course, there are a lot of bats eating nectar, pollen, or other things associated with flowers. So those bats actually serve as pollinator. In the process, they help the plants to fertilize and pass the pollen from one to another. So there are pollen nectar eating bats. And of course, the fruit bat I showed earlier, usually those fruit eating bats, those fruit bats are diurnal. They are active during the day because vision using eyes, it's a better way to find fruits than using echolocation. So a lot of them tend to have bigger eyes so they can see better. And of course, the famous vampire bats, those that suck blood out of other animals. Totally, there are 3 species of vampire bats. They're all located near the equator. So we actually do not have any of those in the United States. Our neighbor Mexico has some, but you would have to go pretty south to see them. Um, and the chance those vampire bats actually preying on human, sucking human blood out is actually very low. They tend to target cows or sheep's, those domestic animals as their food source. And of course, as earlier I said, there are frog-eating bats. So I have a picture to show this one right here. This bat is capturing a frog. And this is how they capture. They fly down and grab the frog out of water. So given the high number of species, the food choice, again, very diverse. And because they eat all kinds of food items, they play a vital role in our ecosystems, because those bats that prey on insects can control the agricultural pests or other insects that we prefer not to have. Um, the fruit-eating bats or the nectar pollen-eating bats will play a role to spread the seeds, spread the pollen, to help all all the plants to grow. So they are quite essential. And of course, themselves are also being eaten by higher level predators like snakes and owls in the natural environment. In cities, could be cats or other animals potentially. Um, in the natural environment, they provide food source for those higher level predators. So to keep the whole system function. And I'm just sharing basic knowledge biology that we know about bats. You will be surprised how short scientists or biologists have been studying bats compared to our knowledge to birds, the typical flying animals, or compare to our knowledge with other mammal species like large mammals like tigers, lions, monkeys, other mammals. We really don't know much about bats. That's probably one of the reasons I am a bat biologist, to conduct research to better understand them. Here I have some weird pictures to show weird bats, and nowadays most of bat biologists still don't know why they look so weird, but I think they are very interesting to look at. For example, this long-eared horseshoe bat, if you look at a face, it first off, the color is yellow, very bright, and almost like a mask like structure. We don't know why this particular bat has the structures like that. Like the tube-nosed bats, pretty obvious. The name tells everything. Their noses look like two tubes. Why? We don't know. Particularly why, particularly in this way, not sure. Wrinkled faced bats, I found them particularly interesting. Their face is all wrinkled. Why are they all wrinkled? No, we don't know why. Or this champion free tail bats with almost like a crown on top of its head. Very decorative, but we don't know why it has such a structure. Because really, remember I mentioned earlier that a lot of those bat species I'm showing here are nocturnal, meaning that a lot of those features, weird features we're seeing, cannot be seen in the natural darkness. So if it cannot be seen, it cannot be used for choosing mates or indicating themselves, like showing their status or anything. It doesn't work like that because they cannot be seen. So that's why it's very puzzling for the bat biologists about a lot of those structures. But I think they're really exciting to show. Or like this hammerhead bat, their face is like that. Why it has that elongated nose part that looks like a hammer? Um, we don't really know particularly why. So that is just a quick basic background about the biology of bats. From there, I would like to shift the conversation today to the emphasis of conservation, particularly conservation in eastern Nebraska. To begin that, I would like to show everyone the nice species that we have in eastern Nebraska. When I use the word eastern Nebraska, I'm sure a lot of you are from here. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I use it very loosely. I refer to as far as Cherry County. If you go down south, I would refer to as west as North Platte, for example. All of those counties, all the way to Iowa, I refer them as eastern Nebraska, even though obviously it's halfway into the state, sometimes even more than halfway into the state. But that's what I use the word eastern Nebraska. In eastern Nebraska, typically we have 9 different species of bats that I'm showing here on the screen. I use the circle to indicate species that are either declining or has declined, sadly. Um, and because of the decline, they already earned or earning some conservation status. To begin with, the solid orange circle I have here highlighting the northern long-eared Myotis, or sometimes we call it northern long-eared bat. This is a newly listed by the federal government as endangered species. The listing, the legal status went through, I believe, 2 years ago. And then the 2 other orange circles I am using dash line, one is the little brown bat, one is the tricolor bat. Both are being listed. I'm sure everybody understands the legal process is a lengthy, time-consuming process. So both are in the process to be listed as endangered species. And besides those 3, we have 6 more species, and some of them are also on the agenda to be considered down the road in the near future. And if you ask me why they're endangered, before we ask ourselves why they're endangered, we should look at, should we care about that? And of course, many of you here in the audience are nature lovers, animal lovers. You love them. But I still want to talk to the even broader audience, every single person out there. I think there are reasons for us to be concerned about the decline of bats. To begin with, I already mentioned that the bats contribute a lot to pest control in the agriculture industry. And I have this map here based on a study to estimate how much farmers have to pay for pesticides if all those pests for cornfield were not eaten by bats. So just imagine in this extreme scenario, all the bats are gone and no nocturnal pest predators. You have to buy pesticides to spray into your field. The estimate, just to remind you, this was done more than a decade ago when the price was low. With the inflation and changes in the recent years, I don't know the exact number should be nowadays, but just say more than a decade ago, for the entire continental United States, the estimate would be $3.7 billion for people in the agriculture industry to buy pesticides to replace bats. And particularly, I think it's important for us living in Nebraska or us living in the Midwest, because the map here is showing the amount farmers would have to pay. The more red you see, the more money they need to pay. And pretty obvious, Nebraska, where we are, belong to the deep red color zone because our state's economy really relies on agriculture and particularly corn production. So just from that particular perspective, I think it's important for everybody, not just the biologists like me, not just the nature lovers like many of you. Everybody in our society should care about it. And on top of that, because I mentioned earlier, bats can fly, they can travel rather long distance as compared to other mammals. Because when we talk about mammals, because we are mammals, so we really should pay attention to other mammals, because that's the most likely scenario where a disease can transfer from one group to another. Like the bird flu, for example, that is happening right now, it's particularly targeting birds. And of course, we're not going to talk about the physiology, but the chance a disease targeting birds, targeting snakes, targeting frogs or snails is less likely to be transferred into human as compared to diseases that are affecting other mammals. So most of the mammals we don't have a lot of encounter. They are out there in the wilderness, pretty far away from us. Unless you visit Yellowstone, you visit national parks, you visit places, a lot of times you only see them in the zoo. There's really no direct interaction with between human and those mammals. On the other hand, bats can fly. They can be somewhere remote in the wilderness, interact with other mammals, and they can fly far back into cities, interact with us. And if unfortunate confrontations happen between humans and bats, there's a higher chance to disease spill over because again, remind everybody bats are mammals just like us. A disease that can infect bats are very likely to infect humans and other mammals, or more likely to infect humans and other mammals than disease to other group of animals. So on top of the agriculture aspect, the human health or the public health aspect should also be something we pay attention to. And because of that, I think we should revisit the threats faced by bats nowadays. And of course, the three species I talked about earlier, um, they are being threatened, or the decline of those species are caused by a disease called white nose syndrome, which is a fungus infection. The fungus infection, the fungus itself was introduced from Europe to the United States in 2006. The infection itself, it's comparable to human skin infection that generally does not kill directly. It's not lethal. Um, but you can see this bat on the left side of the screen is infected with this like white hair looking thing. That's the fungal infection. Um, it's irritating. It's itchy. And because of that, a lot of bats will have to respond to this itchiness on their skin. And for those bats that generally hibernate through the winter, you can see the disease was first discovered in upstate New York, which is cold. Bats there, or like right now happening in Nebraska, when it's cold, they hibernate or going into shorter period of sleep to preserve energy. And just imagine if your skin is itchy, you have some kind of infection, you try to scratch, or mosquito bites. When you have a lot of those, you cannot sleep well. The same thing goes for bats. They will have problems to sleep. And when they are wakened by the disease through sleep in the winter, when everything is frozen, there's no water to drink. there's no food, particularly insects, for example, to consume. So they would die from starvation or dehydration. So this is the reason we have species, the 3 species are being listed, and it's an infectious disease, so it's spreading. You can see the map I have here, started from upstate New York and is already in our state in 2016-ish. On top of that, another threat faced by bats is wind energy development. There are a lot of good things about wind energy as a renewable source, and especially for the Midwest, where the wind is strong. But unfortunately, the wind turbines physically can hurt bats in many different ways. And as I said earlier, there are a lot of flying bats. They can fly a long distance, and those wind turbines happen to be on the way where they fly through. And we call them flyaways. Those wind turbines happen to be on their flyways, and the wind turbine unfortunately kills a lot of bats. So that's another major threat faced by North American bats. And of course, they eat insects. We all have heard a little bit about bioaccumulation. Basically, if you have something toxic, you spread it into the environment, the animals can accumulate a little bit. The insects would have a little bit, if the particularly pesticides, if they don't kill the insect right away, the insects would carry a little bit toxin inside of their body. And those insects being eaten by bats, whatever the toxic compounds could accumulate in bats and hurt bats. And another thing that I have been studying and I need to bring up is the urban, particularly residential development, when it happens, when it changes natural habitats into an environment that mostly to fulfill human needs. A lot of things can happen, and this is one of the things my lab is focusing on to better understand exactly how this urbanization process affects bats. And now that let me shift to the ongoing bat research at my lab at UNO, mostly to show you the conservation efforts we're hoping to achieve through our research. To begin with, of course, white nose syndrome, the fungus that already made 1 species listed as endangered, 2 on the way to be listed, is something we cannot overlook. Earlier, I mentioned that the disease got to Nebraska in 2016. We happen to have, our state happens to have some baseline information before the arrival of the white nose syndrome that is shown at WNS, white nose syndrome. So my lab is contracted or sponsored by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, led by my current grad student, Mr. Peacock, to revisit sites where we had information prior to the white nose syndrome. So we're surveying the eastern Nebraska to compare before the disease versus after the disease. And this is his work focusing on the northern long-eared bat. That's the listed endangered species. We are mapping the potential distribution or potential suitable habitats for this species. And one thing particularly interesting is that this on the map, if you look at it, Omaha and Lincoln, both urban areas, could potentially be suitable habitat for this species. If you wonder why, just a few minutes ago, I was saying urbanization could be a threat to bats. I think a lot of our knowledge about bats currently we have is based on the forest ecosystem, not necessarily grassland ecosystem. So if you ever travel to the east or west coast, like east coast where I was before moving to Nebraska, I was in North Carolina. I took a picture here. And this is the picture I have for Nebraska. If you compare them, that's pretty obvious. And such a difference could be a reason that the northern long-eared bat might be benefited from urbanization, which we still do not have concrete results yet. This is just our preliminary results. The idea behind is that this is a species that needs forests, like the picture I'm showing here. And in the grassland ecosystem, naturally, we don't really have forests unless it is some riparian habitat near the river, near the creek, could potentially be forest encroachment, some invasive tree species growing, or urban environment where we humans intentionally plant trees for decoration or other reasons. So we suspect that the forests or trees introduced by urbanization could potentially help bats in the grassland ecosystem. So this is a student of mine doing comparison between grassland and forest ecosystem. So that's some ongoing research in my lab. And of course, for the grassland ecosystem, Nebraska, for example, we have predominantly agriculture. We have turned most of the grasslands into agricultural field. Like the background picture I have here, you can see on one side is the corn, which is a typical crop we see here. And there's still a lot of grassland restoration efforts. You can see on the uh, left side of the screen. So my lab has been doing a comparison study using the bat recorders I showed earlier, the bat detectors. We just do a paired comparison. We put one detector on this side, we put another one on the other side, just pair them up to see which side would get more bats. Just imagine a buffet you visit. You have the sushi counter, you have the maybe fried chicken counter, hypothetically, and you can just stand there and observe, see which counter gets more people, and potentially you can look at what kind of people going for sushi, which kind of people going for fried chicken. It, of course, just a made up scenario, but the concept behind is the same. That we have bat recorders in the restored grassland, in the cornfield. We can compare, for example, like the big brown bat, which side this bat would spend more time, where we would record more of this particular species. And this is the preliminary results from this comparison to show that we generally have more big brown bats eating in the grassland than the cornfield, um, basically to investigate the benefit of grassland restoration. Of course, I'm not saying that we should get rid of the corn, because that's the backbone of the economy of the state. Instead, the idea is, when you introduce those small patches of restored grassland by your cornfield, you can invite or bring in a lot of bats to do forage, because that's what we hope to do next. If the funding opportunity presents, we would like to move forward, because this is just a pair up comparison. In the future, we would like to see more broader scale across multiple farms with different levels of restored grassland nearby, truly to understand if having those small patches of restored grassland near your cornfield, whether they would bring more bats to the area or not. The general hope is those small restored grassland patches could be a useful conservation tool to help bats and increase foraging or pest control in general. And of course, earlier mentioned that we have the invasive species. My lab is collaborating with Nebraska Game and Parks. This is for the central part of Nebraska, we are looking at a before and after treatment. The commission has plans to get rid of invasive eastern red cedars on those properties. So we are working together to see, by removing those invasive tree species, how bats would respond. We don't know yet. This is something ongoing, but it will provide some insight on invasive tree species management. And at the same time, my lab is also developing a more molecular-based tools like DNA tools. For those of you who are into true crime, I'm sure you have heard, oh, there's somebody's DNA on the scene. Not necessarily on the victim nowadays. You can even find DNA in the environment, in the house, on the crime scene. It's the same concept that we can collect DNA from the environment, like my grad student is doing on here. He is using a roller to roll the outside of this old house, or more like a barn, I suppose. And the DNA leftovers would be attached to the roller, and we push the roller, we wash it off with solutions and filter through this particular filter I have here. And once we get the DNA, then we go through the typical true crime protocol. We extract DNA, sequence it, analyze, identify two species. My lab is working on this type of DNA tools. We can we can learn what bat species were there. We can learn potential diseases, because besides rolling the buildings, we can also capture bats and collect DNA from the skin, collect the fecal sample, just like the gut microbiome we have been talking about in human. We can get gut biome analysis from bats to understand the health condition, to understand um, maybe potential diseases. So this is the DNA tool for monitoring that my lab is developing. And particularly down this line, down this molecular line, is something my lab is in, or my grad student is interested in. We all know that Omaha has a history of lead pollution, that um, a lot of heavy metal concentration through the factory. If you look at a map, this is where it happened. It was shut down in the late 90s, but we still have lead contaminants in the environment. If we circle back to how bats eat and drink, because they are the top predators for insects both from the water and the land, again, the toxic compounds can accumulate. So if we collect environmental DNA, we collect fecal sample, we can potentially build stronger links between bats and the pollution to understand if this urbanization, urban related pollution would affect bats. So this is some ongoing research that is in my lab. And of course, everything comes back to how I started this conversation, is the backyard habitat management. This has two aspects. One is, I mentioned the trees in urban environment being really important. That also means how we manage our trees in the backyard in our neighborhood will be important. But also I mentioned the pollution, particularly that is happening, that is still there in our city. So we have this backyard habitat management project that is happening. Hopefully we can push another summer, even though the financial situation right now doesn't look good. We hope to push for another summer so we can have data collected throughout the city of Omaha to better understand, and potentially, on top of understanding bats, we also hope the bats can serve as an indicator to understand the environment we live in, because it's crucial for us to be somewhere that is healthy and safe. And from there, I will be happy to take any questions the audience may have.
And then
I
Dr.
know
Hahn,
it.
sorry to interrupt. I'm gonna
Mm,
launch the Q&A.
okay.
And this will just be the poll.
I
Um,
will stop sharing, so this will be back to you.
Perfect. All right, where's the need to go into full screen for this? There we go. Okay, if you guys could fill out that survey, we'd really appreciate it. And then now we'll be open for comments, questions, concerns for Dr. Hahn. Dr. Hahn, I actually had a question, and this was towards the beginning. What is that term called where bats, birds, humans, where we have the same, is it homolog,
Homologous structures um,
yes.
basically is a term that biologists, particularly evolutionary biologists who studied origin of organisms, they use that to describe structures that could be anatomical, could be molecular DNA level that share the same origin. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that like between a human and an E. coli or something, there's like a certain level of the DNA being the same, or like they say between human and a pig, the DNA amount, like the amount of DNA that is similar or comparable. That's the same thing. It's the homologous or homology, homologous structures or homology, that's the term to describe things with the same origin. The other term is analogous structures. If we say the word analogous structures, basically we would refer to structures or features that uh, basically come from the same environment in organisms that are not closely related. For example, like just in terms of how organisms move, dolphins can swim, fish can swim. Swimming here is an analogous feature because fish and dolphins happen to be mammal, are not that closely related. I think that should be pretty obvious. But they both swim because they both live in the aquatic water environment, and the environment selecting them into the same thing that is called analogous. Another thing is the flying squirrels and bats. They all have wing looking things, and that is another potentially analogous feature because relatively squirrels and bats are not that closely related, but they all have wing looking structures.
Wonderful. Yeah, I took an evolutionary class and I would just needed some reminders on that.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, just quickly, I'm putting my email, and because I know I stopped sharing, I'm putting my emails in the chat. So anybody wants to have questions, they can always email me later.
yeah, that'd be great. And um, let's see. Perfect. Okay, we will just give seems like we don't have any questions coming in. But
No, the weather is so awful.
it's it's kind of nap inducing and can definitely make people a little sluggish. So, but
Yeah.
Dr. Hahn, is there any final remarks that we should know about Wonderful World of Bats in Nebraska or
I mean, I said, as I said earlier, we have that neighborhood project coming, and it will still be in collaboration with Grassland Unlimited, local nonprofit organization. Um, if you follow them, you interact with them, support them, that will support my research down the road.
and then we also wanted to announce about Dr. Hahn, you wanted to take us in person to go see bats as well.
Yes, there's earlier I said we can observe bats, not necessarily seeing, but we can hear them. If we're lucky, we can see them for sure. When the weather warms up, like truly warm, not like the fake spring we had a couple weeks ago. Maybe early May, I can have an in-person, probably just on UNO campus, short walk tour, just right after sunset. We can walk around the Almut Park and see if there are any bats near us.
Perfect. And then it looks like we did get a comment of I had a bat monitor last year, five
Oh,
species detected, average 8.3 a day. How does this compare to other monitors? And this is by Lisa Fox.
oh. Well, I will have to go back to check the data. And then now looking at the name, um, Trevor, I did mention your name. I recognize that name actually. Um, I will have to compare. If you have 5 species detected, that is pretty good because earlier I said we have 9, but the reality is the northern long-eared bat is gone, the endangered one. We have not recorded northern long-eared bats in Omaha area since 2018. So it's like 7 years. The little brown bats, I know there's still some in the parks, state parks near us, but the chance they fly right into the city is still unknown. So that already took 2 out of 9. So there are 7 species left. Um, the tricolor bats is also rare. It has been a rare species for eastern Nebraska even before the white nose syndrome. So that is very unlikely to have. That's cut back to down to 6. Typically, we can have 6 maximum, and you got 5. I think that's already a pretty high number. Also, what we did with Grassland Unlimited last year was the fall season. Summer is the top, most active time of the year when we record the most of bats. In the fall, because it was almost like a test run to see how it would play out. Honestly, we had no expectation with so many people signing up. Again, I truly appreciate everybody's participation. So I think we're going to try to do it again, but this time we're going to do it in June and July, the prime time to study bats. Hopefully we can get more, and hopefully I will talk to Trevor. He will manage the details. He is responsible for the logistics. Hopefully we can go back to visit Lisa's house again.
Wonderful. Awesome. All right. I think that will be a wrap on today's
Mhm.
presentation. Dr. Hahn, I just wanted to again thank you for coming to do this, especially under circumstances with the weather and everything today. So, thank you for taking your time to do this.
Yeah,
And we will hopefully see you again here real soon.
sure.
All
Everybody
right.
take care.
Take care,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.